Okay, well, and then I think we can already give over to Celine. There was one more question in the chat. I will see if I can take it out and we can discuss it later after the last presentation. But then I guess I will give the word to Celine.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So my name is Soline. I work for the French Livestock Institute, and I'm going to talk today about the French case, how the farmers adapt to climate change, considering grassland management. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. So just to give you a quick overview of what's ahead of us in France, considering climate change, we expect an increase in the average annual temperature, such as in Italy and in every other country, especially during summer. Considering rainfall, it's actually not that clear, but at the moment we expect a stable annual rainfall, so we're not gonna have a change in the annual rainfall, but the repetition within the year will be a bit different. So we'll have less rain during summer, but a bit more during winter and spring, which can be a difficulty for the farmers because they can't graze that much in spring and they don't have any grass left during summer. So they have to find solutions to face these problems. So just to give you oops, there's no animation, okay. Just to give you a quick overview of what happened in the past 3 years in France. So in the winter 2022, we had very few rain, but then the spring was really warm and dry, so that was absolutely perfect to make some good hay and to graze a lot. But then the drought continued during the summer, and we had the first ever recorded, the hottest summer ever recorded in France in 2022. So that was really, really hot. There was nothing left to eat in the grasslands, but hopefully the rain came back during autumn. So the farmers were able to do some grazing and do some cuttings during autumn until mid-November. So that was really good. That was relief for them to make stocks for the winter. And then 2023 was really different. So it was really, really dry during winter. We actually didn't have any rain for a month in February 2023. So that was really unusual. So in a way, it was good because the farmers were able to graze during that time. So that was really much earlier than usual, but they could graze. But then you can't see it. The clouds came back in spring, so it was really wet. We had a lot of rain, so they stopped grazing. Actually, the animals came back to the barn, and that was nearly impossible to make some good hay and good forage during that spring in most of the regions. And then it got dry, and then it got wet. It was a bit of a mess in spring 2023. And the rain continued during summer and during autumn, so that was good for grass growth actually, but not so good for forage quality. And the animals get back inside by mid-October in autumn, so that's quite early because it was all wet. And this year, 2023, well, it's just rain. It's just rain. We had way too much rain during spring. That was impossible to graze before the beginning of May in most of the regions, so that's super late. So the animals were kept in the barn and fed in the barn, so the farmers didn't have stocks at the end of spring 2024. And it was super hard to sow the maize silage at the same time because it was too wet. And actually, at the moment, all the maize silage are not harvested yet in France. Some of them are still in the field because it's as well too wet. So we don't have all the maize silage is not done actually. So just for you to understand that there are no normal years anymore, and that farmers have to adapt to different climate conditions and have to figure out some solutions to every different problems. So considering grass growth, what we expect is the line in red. That's the far future. So what we expect in the future is to have an earlier start for grass growth. So maybe we could graze a bit earlier because there's grass to graze. But then in the summer, we're going to have a longer summer break. So grass will stop growing for a longer period. And farmers will have to figure out solutions to feed the animals during that period. And in the autumn, we will have a higher and longer growth. So maybe we could maintain some grazing a bit more at the end of the year as well. So considering that this predicted evolution, we could have we could use different levers to adapt. So here's the grass growth, and depending on the period of the year, you could adopt different levers. So first, you could use fertilization to speed up the growth to boost the overall production of the grasslands. Or you could use multi-species grasslands that are more resilient. I will talk about that a bit later. Or you could sow forage crops to maintain grazing during the dry period, summer, for example. You could do stockpile grazing, bale grazing as well in summer or in winter. Grazing legume swards during summer as well. Farmers work on securing grassland sowing in the autumn as well, and winter grazing, why not? So I will talk about these different solutions. So to start with the multi-species grasslands. So we had a few series of experiments in France, especially in the experimental farm of Torigny d'Anjou, which is in the Pays de la Loire region. So it's an organic beef cattle farm, and they have 650 millimeters of rainfall per year. And so they did a trial, they tried the composition made of perennial ryegrass and white clover, which is really classic. And they tried a multi-species grassland, which was made of perennial ryegrass and white clover as well. But they added tall fescue, hybrid clover, and bird's foot trefoil, which is really adapted to the dry conditions of the farm. And they actually measured the annual yield of these different compositions in different types of soils, in shallow soil, rather shallow soil, and deep soil. And what you can see is that the multi-species grassland have a higher annual production, than the classic perennial ryegrass and white clover, but in every type of soil. So that's really interesting in the dry soil, but actually in the deep soil, it works as well. And the thing is that they measured also the variation of yield between the year, and the yield is more stable for the multi-species grassland. So that's really a resource you can rely on in different years, no matter the weather conditions. So that's a good solution, and farmers tend to use that more and more. Then, as the year goes on, you could also use the forage crops to keep grazing, and especially if you want to renew your grasslands. So most of the farmers, they sow the grasslands in autumn, and so they plow them during spring, and they put another crop in between to catch the nitrogen. But with the forage crops, it's a way to maintain grazing while renewing the grasslands. So you don't have grass to graze, but you have a forage crop instead. So the idea is to extend grazing on summer forages to complement the existing pastures so that you don't overgraze these existing pastures. So you save them by grazing other surfaces. It's a way to capture the nitrogen instead of leaching it. And then that's a resource that is intended for animals with moderate needs to save high quality forage stocks. So in France, we use different resources. Farmers tend to use more and more for the sorghum. Either you can cut it and make silage out of it, or you can graze it. But just be careful that you can't graze it below 60 centimeters high, otherwise animals will die. They can also use the fodder rapeseed, which is really popular at the moment, because it be grazed during summer or during autumn, depending on the period when you sow it. So that's really flexible. There's chicory as well, not that popular because it's really hard to manage chicory and when it's sown with the other species, especially in multi-species grasslands, because it doesn't have the same cycle development. So you have to come back on it every 2 weeks, which is hard for the other species. So it's easier to grow it impure, just chicory. But actually resists quite well to drought. And then there's fodder beet as well, which can be harvested but also grazed a few hours a day. That's really nice, even for the dairy cows, no problem. And it's easy to manage with the strip grazing. So that's solutions farmers use to extend the grazing area in dry seasons. Another way to deal with dry season, but just using the grasslands you have, is to do some stockpile grazing, which is a solution with animals with average needs. So the idea is just to keep grazing instead of cutting grass and then giving it back during summer, because I mean, why cutting it when you can graze it? But it's not really appropriate in every grassland, so you have to be careful to choose the right one. You have to have deep soil to ensure good growth during spring, because you need a lot of grass before doing stockpile grazing, and more than 40% of legumes. That's what recommended, because the legumes, they keep their nutritional value a bit longer than the grasses. So it's really nicer to get more legumes. And how to do it really? The idea is to accumulate enough grass on the plot before starting grazing, but avoid exceeding the 60 days of regrowth time and 50 days for perennial ryegrass, because otherwise the nutritional value will really drop down. And it's advised to use a front wire to prevent the grass wastage, because the grass height is like really high, above 50 centimeters. So using a front wire avoids wastage. So beef cattle farmers use that quite often as well. And then there's a bit of disruptive solution coming out in France. That's the bale grazing. So it's a solution as well for animal with average needs. And it's actually under investigation in France, because we don't have that much references about that technique. But the idea is to keep grazing when the grass is not growing enough. It can be during summer, but it can also be during winter. And the idea is to maintain rotational grazing, so that the animals change their paddocks every 1 or 2 days. And the idea is that they graze the grass, but they also eat bales of hay or haylage. That can be done with both. So the thing is that after making hay or haylage, the farmers, they just leave the bales in the grasslands, in the paddocks, like in the chessboard scheme. And during the dry season, it can be winter, it can be summer, the farmers, they just move the front wire every 1 or 2 days, so that the animals can have access to another bale, a new one, a fresh one. And the bale can be left in place, so the animals all graze around it, or it can be unrolled to avoid competition. And the result of that is that it's better than using a parking plot, because you don't sacrifice a grassland, you just maintain rotational grazing, and the grassland is not plowed after that. It's okay. And the animals can be kept outdoors all year long, because instead of feeding them in the barn, you can feed them outside. And there's less fuel needed, because instead of feeding them in the barn, then using straw, and then getting the manure out and then spreading it in the grassland, all the animals do the job in the grassland directly. And then during autumn, the farmers sow the new grassland, the temporary or future permanent grasslands. And the thing is that the period where they can sow the grassland is between mid-August to end of September. But as we have longer droughts and more frequent droughts, the conditions are not okay to sow grasslands during that period. So the idea is to sow a bit later, from mid-September to mid-October, where you have more chances to get the rain back. So the idea is to sow the grasslands under cereal protein crop mixtures. You can sow them at the same time. So the grassland is sown from 0 to 1 centimeter, and the cereals are sown to 2 to 3 centimeters. Then they develop. All together. And then during the spring, you can harvest the cereal protein crop mixture, make silage out of it, and then give it to the animals. Or you can actually go to grain and harvest the grain. And then the grassland is set, and then you can actually graze or cut it during summer or the autumn, after the harvest of the cereal protein crop mixture. And the result of that technique is that the grasslands are cleaner, so there's less weed and more interesting and sown species. There's more overall fodder production than just grazing the grassland, than just sowing the grassland, thanks to the mixture. So you have a higher fodder production, and you have no negative impact on grass production after that. So the grass grows well, and then you have more fodder production, and it's cleaner. So that's a really good solution. And farmers tend to use that more and more as well. And then the last solution that can be used during winter is the winter grazing. So we had a trial for 3 years in 3 different experimental farms in the western part of France. We had one in La Blanche Maison, which is in Normandy. They have 950 millimeters of rain per year, and they had a trial where they put the beef outside during all winter and just grazing. We had then Torigny d'Anjou, I talked about that previously, and they had the same kind of trial with beef. And then we have Trévarez, which is in Brittany. They have twice as much rain as Torigny d'Anjou, so 1,200 millimeters per year. And they had 2 types of trials. They had dairy cows staying in the barn versus eating in the barn and grazing 2 hours per day. So just to see if grazing has an interest in the milk production, and heifers staying 100% outside during all winter. And what they saw is that actually the grass doesn't stop growing during winter in this part of France. So there's grass to graze, and it would be a shame not to graze it. So that's a great opportunity. And as I said as well, the grass will grow more during autumn. So there's more grass stock to eat during winter. So that's an opportunity. And actually that grass is quite good. Well, really good. Is 16 to 21% and medium to high energy content. So that's really good grass. And what they observed is that whether you don't graze it during winter or you graze it during winter, you have the same grass production. So it doesn't, when you graze during winter, it doesn't affect the production in the next spring. So you have the same amount of grass. It's just that you're going to delay the regrowth of grass in spring. And so you can do that in small paddocks, like in part of your paddocks, and not do it in other parts of your paddocks. And then you have a delay during spring, so it's easier for the farmers to manage to deal with the growth boost during spring. And actually, there's no change in grassland composition, not less or more legumes, so no impact. And there's no grassland degradation. Even if you can see a lot of hoof tracks in the grasslands, it looks a bit messy, a bit brown. You can see some soil, but in the next spring, there's nothing left. So there's no problem with that in these conditions. So that was just a quick overview for you to understand what the farmers do, what we are working on in France with the experimental farms. And if you have questions, I would be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celine. There's just one question in the chat. It's, have you trialed use of chicorée, plantain, and multi-species swords? I think you explained that. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Oh, sorry, I didn't understand the question. Have you trialed?
Have you trialed use of chicorée or plantain in multi-species swords?
Yeah, we have. In Torigny d'Anjou, the experimental farm that I talked about, they did, and that was quite interesting. But I mean, really, with the multi-species swords, it doesn't fit. Like the rhythm of exploitation, it doesn't really work. So the chicory will go to flower, and then the cows will not eat it, and they will graze the other species, the grasses, and so on. And so the grasses are exhausted, but the chicory is not eaten. So it's not easy. Yeah. And plantain, farmers use plantain. Yes, we had trials as well, but it tends to be quite aggressive, which is not, I mean, that's quite surprising. But sometimes we have like all paddocks made of plantain because something happened, and it's not so easy. We thought it would not be that aggressive, but in some conditions it is. So it's not really easy as well.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers the questions, Matt. Otherwise, just raise your hand or ask the question more directly. There's a second question from Paul. What was the year or the years of the multi-species swaths trial in Anjou?
Yeah, that's quite an old trial. It was around 2010. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? If not now, you can also write it in the chat and we will come back to them later if we have time. Okay, if there's no more questions, I would give over the voice to Dr. Ralf Loges from the University of Kiel to introduce us to the German situation.
Okay. Hello, and thank you. I tried to share my screen. Is it there? How to manage grassland? Can you see it? Yes. Okay, I try. We talked a little bit in advance how I could cover whole of Germany, but then we found out that in a later meeting, you will handle the role of southern Germany, even if it in the program says the continental side. No, we are more or less here in the temperate climatic zone of northern Western Europe, and therefore this might be deviating. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a bit about dairy farming and forage production in Germany. I try to now how it works. This is just where I'm located. There on the right, University of Kiel. It's Schleswig-Holstein, the most northern part, and very close to Denmark. And as I said, we are as Ireland or the Netherlands and the west part of Denmark, part of the temperate regions where we usually didn't have any dry seasons. Of course, warm summer, but things have changed. Typically, we receive 820 millimeters of rainfall, quite evenly spread over all months, and maxima could be in June and August, but then also evapotranspiration is at the highest, so it feels, of course, drier. And the average temperature might be quite milder compared to situation we heard about. It's 9.3 degrees, gives us quite a comfortable situation. But we have to notice this is already an increase of temperature by 1.6 degrees since 1880, just to notice this if we still are talking about 1 degree or 1.5 degrees climatic change. So that means that we have our temperatures during the last 50 years have increased, and I show you with this slide the temperatures during growing season from mid of April to mid of October. Of course, some grassland already can start growing in the middle of March. So we really gained 300 degrees of temperature, some during the last 50 years. So far, precipitation has not changed, and radiation still was the same, just to show the long-term trends. But of course, first I want to introduce to the characteristics of milk production here at Schleswig-Holstein. On average, we will have cows yielding around 9,500 kilograms of energy-corrected milk per cow, which is delivered. An average herd size of around 180 cows per farm. And the typical system would be all year barn feeding as a typical system. Typically, feeding will be based on around 30 to 35% of grass silage, 30 to 35% of maize silage, and 30 to 35% of concentrates, which then means that our farmers on average offer 300 grams of concentrates per kilogram of energy-corrected milk, which is equivalent to nearly 3,000 kilograms of concentrates per cow and year. And dominant in these regions, of course, it is Holstein, but the Holstein Friesians, they are a re-import after sending them 100 years to the US. They came back. There is still some farmers having some red and white dual-purpose Holsteins, and there is this third breed of Angeln cattle, which is closely related to Scandinavian red, just to show the average farm. But with this trends of slightly increasing temperatures, we start also recognizing climatic challenges. So far, we didn't know about dry seasons here, but there are extended dry seasons limiting yields of forage crops, especially grass crops. And an extreme was here the year 2018, and this was the year when even Ireland suffered of drought. And then we had forage shortages. We have extended periods of rainfall, of course, limiting field operations, like that were mentioned from France. Happily, we managed to get the silage maize in. That was also the situation of last year, but then it was too late to do something else on the fields. We have harder winds and storms. For example, 2023 flooding events along the coastline of the Baltic Sea. That's where we do not look at this. More, it's the North Sea, and heat stress issues occur both in barns, especially in old barns, and as well as on pastures. But luckily, we have quite a lot of winds also during summertime, so that is not so far the big issue when grazing here. And now we had to find out new pests. The blue tongue disease has appeared and can cause serious problems. But not all of these problems I could solve. I just can focus on forage productions. We have these extended dry seasons, drought seasons, not in every year, but in some years it can be extreme. So one of the solutions definitely is we have to build up strategic silage reserves. We were taught by our advisors not to do it because it's money that could lay in the bank. But at least in 2018, we found out reserves is an idea. Our organic growers organization say 30% of reserves of silage you have to have, otherwise you can't be certificated. And then we should be aware of using other crops as jokers for forage production. And then on mixed farms, often whole crop silages from cereals fields come into the game, where you then can decide to use it when the first cut of silage was not good. When you feel that you suffer shortages, then taking some cereal fields and make whole crop silage of them. And if it turns out to be stable, then you harvest them for concentrates or for selling. And then the use of intermediate crops as proposed, cover crops as additional forages, more and more annual ryegrass or forage rye, and some Italian ryegrass is grown as intermediate crops, especially after early harvested cereals, and then harvested sometimes already in autumn, and then just before the the silage maize is sown. So this could be a solution, but it bears the danger, of course, that there may be not enough water for the silage maize. And then some of the proposals for drought adaptants could be the drought-tolerant grasses, tall fescue or orchard grass, as named before. I will also show you some results. Deep-rooting legumes such as alfalfa, red clover, and birdfoot trefoil, also mentioned before, and deep-rooting forage herbs such as chicory and plantain, also mentioned before. But of course, there is the long-term strategy to build up soil organic matter to increase water storage. And this is on top a climatic friendly strategy, because 1,000 kilograms of more soil carbon is that it saves for an emission of 3,200 kilograms of CO2. So to start with, some experiments with the effect of grass species on the yield. Unfortunately, as a unit of yields, I used the decitons of dry matter, just divided by 10, and then you have the tons in dry matter. In a typical year, 2021, the green part, and in a dry year, 2022, it is just the effect of the companion grass compared to the left side perennial ryegrass or other ryegrasses. And then as the third last column, there is the tall fescue, as it was mentioned before. And in a typical year, it does not help. The cows might even like it grazing, but we can talk about adaptations there like soft leaf type or high sugar types. But yes, in a dry season, the tall fescue helps us with 10 to 15% of higher yields. So this is true, but it does not change the system totally, because we still are so lucky that most of the year it rains regularly. But what comes, we have to see. And then here's just the same slide, just showing that it really helped when we looked at the single cuts, that when drought came in August and September, swards with the tall fescue helped us to maintain grass growth, and that was good for grazing, because it's not only the total yield, but it's yield stability we in some situation might want. If the cows then want to graze it, it's a different type. But of course, I can tell you the soft leaf types, they wanted to graze. And then we have the legumes here in a 5-cut system. As mentioned before, if we set the standard here in the right side, the white clover grass, when it's white clover and perennial ryegrass, also again in a comparably wet year, 2021 to 2022, in yellow as a dry year. We could see that the deep rooting legumes on the left side, when we mix red clover into the swards, but more extreme if we mix alfalfa into the swards or use even alfalfa as a pure stand, we have an increase of around 20% of more yields. So also this helps, but luckily most of the vegetation period, it was a normal year. And then, of course, the multi-species swards. For us at our research farm, it is the standard to graze. I could talk a little bit about it, how we do and how we get the cows to eat the plantain and the chicory. The chicory is here on the left side, and we even have red clover in grazing mixtures. And when the red clover is defoliated 10 times per year, it always has some green leaves left. It even can tolerate grazing over 3 years. But the interesting thing of the multi-species is, of course, we have different plant functional traits, differing rooting systems, and that may help us to use the water more efficient. But of course, also in experimental periods, we have different years. What it helped, the cows, they like it. That's interesting. And they always help us to come over periods when the typical white clover grass does not grow. But also bees and bumblebees, they like these swards. We even published a paper on that. But like it is, the simple mixture and is the columns with the green and the blue top. The blue is the white clover, the green is the perennial ryegrass. We have different years, and they are 3 independent trials. So it's not first, second, and third production year. No, it's always the first production year, because it might be a change in botanical composition. And by accident, we had a normal year, 2016, a very wet year, 2017, and a very dry year in 2018. And it turned out in a normal year, the multi-species swards didn't help us with dry matter production. The left 2 columns in 1 year always are in a rotational grazing system of 10 times grazing. And the right columns, they are 0 grazing when we were feeding fresh grass to the cows. But in the dry years, all deep rooting species, they helped us to increase yields, but always to have yield stability there. Not large effects, but effects that are present. And that's why we use this. Unfortunately, the thing is, when we then use red clover grass to help us to maintain high yields, we always have to see what the competitors say to it when we grow it on the same field. Of course, compared red clover grass on the left hand, always in this combination 2021, a normal year, 2022, a dry year, we have in all possibilities for forage production better yields in 2021, but the grass clover always is superior when it comes to comparison to permanent grassland. But then there is this thing, silage maize, it always is superior in our region, but we are in a region where it is still raining regularly. And unfortunately, as I showed you, that we, or maybe luckily for all the farmers growing silage maize, we made experiments where we had restored old varieties like Oldham and silage maize and looked at the yield and found out that the increase of temperature by 1.6 degrees in our region in reality helped to make this area more suitable to silage maize. So far, the silage maize still is a strategy to help us with forage yields, but seen from the point of view that when we want to avoid the climatic change, we always have to take into account, I just jumped this over, that the silage maize costs us soil carbon. And this is from one experiment. It is not that possible anymore in Germany to change old permanent grassland to maize monocultures. But what we did in this experiment was to see what it did and what there is the difficulty with the silage maize. So we had a 20-year-old permanent grassland. On the left side, it is the soil carbon stocks. We looked at it in 3 different soil layers, and especially in the upper soil layer, the change from grassland to silage maize in both right columns in the course of 7 years decreased soil carbon. And even in a zero-till system, that what we always say that it was ideal, it is reduced, but it is less reduced than when 6 years were plowed to silage maize. But this corresponds, of course, to the fact that the carbon sequestration of grass clover, and please, I apologize for this German slides, but we have a lot of old crop rotation trials where it says that 1 year of grass clover in the crop rotation sequesters up to 600 kilograms of carbon, while growing of silage maize costs us 600 kilograms of soil carbon. That's what we have to take into account. And as I said, 1 ton of soil carbon is an equivalent of 3.5 tons of carbon dioxide. So we have to be aware when we suddenly think, okay, the silage maize is not so bad because it also performs in dry regions, but it's like somehow a very short directed strategy because it enhances the climatic change. And of course, we could do a lot by filling slurry back, but you can't equalize the soil that the soil degradation by silage maize just by filling 50 cubic meters of slurry on top. So to conclude with, under the actual climatic conditions, our farmers still can cope with the climatic change. Of course, they have to be aware of years with forage shortages, so they have to have their reserve strategies. And we'll have to see how the climatic change will continue. We already had this 1.6 degrees of change. So far is what was not the baddest thing for the typical all-year indoors farming system. but possibilities are limited with the crops I proposed so far. But these possibilities, like multi-species swards, they are available and can help to overcome the challenges, especially in grazing systems. But grazing is not typical anymore. But at the moment, our main strategy must not be to contribute more to the climatic change. Unfortunately, I've used all my time. I could give you an example when we combined all these strategies and combined it to with a rotational grazing system, grazing grass clover swards, that it was possible to decrease the carbon footprint of milk production by 40% compared to the standard. The standard carbon footprint would be 1.1 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of energy-corrected milk. And our research farm Lindhof, based on multi-species swards, we can do it with 0.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. But unfortunately, we are limited. So I jump the next slides over and show you how a grazing cow can enjoy a chicory there. So, but we will never get it that long like it is here. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? I don't see any so far in the chat. If you have a question, then just unmute yourself, sorry, and ask your question.
Maybe not a question, but just you said that the maize doesn't produce, maize produces more, than multi-species swards. But I mean, forage production is not just about tons of dry matter, because maize is not balanced in energy and protein. So it's not as interesting as grass that is balanced. So it means you produce more maize, but still you need to concentrate to balance it. So
yes, that's of course clear. I just wanted to mention how farmers on the one hand are trained when they see the economic results yearly published. Then they always see what the forage production costs per 10 units of energy have been. And then they see, okay, yes, maize, let's go. I tried to give a differentiated picture, but of course, we just have the 20 minutes to go. We are running a system on our experimental farm where maize has also returned in a full grazing system just to make a very, very balanced system. Of course, and that was always said, somewhere is the crude protein needs to come from. Sorry for in this picture, I only have the crude protein contents of perennial ryegrass when it's fertilized. Then we have 15% of crude protein. Silage maize has 8% of crude protein. But then we already have the tendency that it is over-fertilized. We made once a model of a critical crude protein content, and then you have 3 times more crude protein when growing the legumes. So that's clear. We know about it, and especially when grazing, we know about excess of protein grazing grass clover fields, and that's there when our strategic feeding of silage maize comes into it. But when on 50 hectares of grass clover, 7 hectares of silage maize are used, then everything is very well balanced. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're heading towards the end of the webinar. If there are no further questions, I would like to you to join again the Menti, because I just want to get a quick check-in. What did you really like from this event, and what would you like to engage more? So maybe Ralf Loges, maybe there might be another webinar if there's a lot of interest. Please put it in the answers. First, yeah, please join the menti.com again. The number is in the chat, and I will share my screen again so you can see the answers. As there are quite some more people joined a bit later, I put the question again: which of these roles do you identify most with? So just so we get an overview who is actually joining our webinars, so we can have it more targeted approach next time, where we know, okay, who is the audience we're addressing. So if you have already selected your role, just skip this question, and we will go further in the next minutes. Okay, great. So there's some more climate smart advisors, researchers. Okay, great. Anybody from the educational system here? Let's wait a few more. Okay. I guess everybody who once had the time to select now, thank you very much. And the next question, okay, not so far, is what was the highlight of the webinar today? What did you like the most? Just put 1 or 2 words in so we can see what sparked your interest, what you liked most of today's presentations, or you can put for each presentation 1 word, however you like, so we can see what was interesting for you. Okay, great. Lucas, I guess we will maybe organize the next webinar with you. Climate trends, okay. Blade grazing explanation, climate change. Okay. Okay. I will leave a few more seconds so you can answer. But we'll further skip to the next question as we are running out of time. I'll just put your word quickly. Oh, thank you very much. If you need one more second, just fill it in. I think I skip now to the next questions, you can still fill in some words. Because as the last question, we would like to know what you would like to engage with more. So we also know for the next webinars how to organize, what topics should we address during the webinars. I will leave this open, but I will stop sharing my screen. You can fill in this as long as you want. I will leave it open for the next 15 minutes. And with that, we are at the end of our webinar. Thank you very much, Celine and Ralf and Alessandro, for the presentation. Alessandro, do you want to have some words at the end as thematic leader of forage production?
Yeah. Thank you to everyone. I think that the interesting point, maybe from my point of view, is that both in Italy, France, and Germany, we are testing more or less the same crops. And also in France, also I saw, and as well in Germany, we are working on crop interaction and how how we can give to the farmer new possibilities in terms of forage production, and so I think there is a lot of common points in our research, and maybe that could be interesting to share our data. Yes, the data that was published, of course, in order to maybe found a common way or common point of view on forest production and as well grassland management. I think that was very interesting point of view, and also yes, good for Ralph Logier that you don't have so big problem with the climate change with the water, and yes, that is good for you and happy for you. And so that's it. That is my point of view, and that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I wish you all a great afternoon. If you have any further questions or directly to Alessandro, Soline, or Ralph, let me know and I will forward them, or Alessandro directly.
Yes, I just to add that I sent to you a PDF of my presentation. So if someone want to the presentation, you can send without problem. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
See you. Bye.
Thank you. See you. Bye. Bye.